My word. A panel game devised by Tony Schreian and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. And here's your chairman, Jack Longland.
Well, we go straight into round one, which tests their vocabulary. For 2 marks, can you give me the meaning of the following words? We begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, your word is Quinsy, Quinsy.
Well, it's a disease.
Yes?
And it's a disease which, if you've taken a fertility pill, the thing that you produce comes out 5 times over and you get quintuplets. Which has been known to happen several times.
Would you sort of like to aim a little higher up?
Aim a little higher up. Well, alternatively, I think I've got it now. Does my voice sound very broken and peculiar?
Rather sexy, I thought.
Just did you? I am charmed. It's a throat disease, I think.
Yes. What's it? Normal modern name. It's quite simple, I think.
Laryngitis.
Oh, no, everything. Virus.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Modern name for everything.
Again, I think you've got to go
sprained ankle.
Just a tiny bit higher than the larynx.
The pharynx is higher than the
Yes,
larynx.
and again. What do you have at the back of your throat?
Pharyngitis.
I've got a uvula. What have you got at the back of your
Let's stick to that.
I didn't get the accessory.
Throatitis. It's a sore throat.
It'll do, I think. It's tonsillitis I was trying to get. It's a rather nasty kind, a suppurative tonsillitis. That's what Quinsy is nowadays normally called. And it comes from 2 Greek words. It means throttling a dog, is rather sad. 2 marks. Frank Muir.
A debacle.
And now, Frank Muir, your word is moratorium.
It's a moratorium. It's sort of a crematorium with money. It means you put a clamp down.
Yes.
You bring things to a halt, as indeed happens at a crematorium. But it's if in this program you asked us a question, asked me this question, and a male elephant on heat escaping from the zoo rampaged through here, and the men came with darts which put the thing to sleep, and all this went on, there'd be a moratorium would be exercised on the question. In other words, you wouldn't expect me to answer until all this was over.
The least I should expect of you.
Moratorium is the same with money, with debts. Things like wartime.
It's the debts I wanted. It's legal permission to defer for a stated or agreed time a payment of a debt or bond or other financial obligation. It's a Latin word from a source that means delay.
There's a lot of it about during the war.
A lot of it about during the war. But it can be a temporary ban on any activity, so Frank is quite right about that elephant of his. Now, Dilys Powell. Dilys, yours is Orrery. O-R-R-E-R-Y. Orrery.
The title, the Duke of something and Orrery.
Boyle.
Something. Boyle and Orrery.
Cork.
No, it's
Cork and Orrery.
You have a cork first, and then you have the Orrery.
Boyle
Yes.
was the family name.
And then there was Cork. Well.
That's right. You're quite right, but this isn't quite in fact. I don't want to...
Know what you want?
I don't want an earl.
No titles.
No, the title is connected with it, quite definitely, but I want an object other than an earl.
It's kind of astronomical object.
Yes, that's right.
It's the universe.
Yes, if you
The
bring it...
world with sort of, Saturn going round it and the moon going round us. Everybody going round in mad circles.
All right, you're being Ptolemaic rather than Copernican, but I'll accept it. 2 marks. It's a clockwork mechanism. Sorry. A clockwork mechanism which shows the movement of the heavenly bodies round the sun, not the earth.
Oh, well.
Dilys. In other words, a model of the solar system, and it was invented in 1713, I think, and constructed for the Earl of Orrery, and it was named after him rather than the chap who built it. 2 marks. Denis Norden. Analgesic.
Analgesic is You could say that money is the best analgesic.
Yes, you could.
It's something that takes pain away.
Yes. Absolutely right. It's either a noun, a medicine, anodyne, that removes pain, or it can be an adjective tending to remove pain. 2 marks. And at this point, I give Denis and Frank a quotation each to think about for their stories in the last round. And Denis, yours is, coming events cast their shadows before. And for you, Frank, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou. Round 2 is a round of remarkable remarks, utterances uttered by well-known people at moments of fairly high drama. For 2 marks, who do you think might have said the following, and what was the dramatic occasion when it was said? Beginning with Anne Scott James, Peccavi, or if you prefer it, it can be Peccavi, Peccavi, Peccavi.
Oh, now, this was a secret message sent back from India to the Foreign Office in London. Peccavi being the Latin for I have sinned. And it therefore meant that who was it had captured Sind?
You're getting
General Napier.
Yes.
General Napier had captured the province of Sind in India.
Yes, quite right. It was said, I think, by him first, being a sort of classical joker. And he then sent it as a one-word dispatch to the Foreign Office, which was enormously embarrassed, because it meant, in saying, I have sinned, it meant he'd fought the Battle of Hyderabad in 1843, and thereby had annexed the whole province of Sind, which was not Her Majesty's government's intention at all. Peccavi, I have sinned. Now, Frank Muir, by God, at this moment I stand astonished by my own moderation.
This was a chap who was impeached, wasn't it? Well, in fact, he'd in fact waxed most eloquent before then. And so it was one of those sort of modest remarks made at the end of this thing.
Yes.
It's either Hastings or Clive.
Yes.
We think it was Clive.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Clive of India.
Yes, he said it during a parliamentary inquiry into his alleged excesses as a soldier and as an administrator in India, and it was in the House of Commons. I think you'll just get home to your 2 marks, because it might almost have been Warren Hastings as well. Dilys Powell, thy necessity is yet greater than mine.
Thy necessity. Oh, it's on a battlefield,
Yes.
I think. Philip Sidney, yes.
Yes, and in what circumstances?
Well, he was sort of wounded and thirsty, and a soldier.
Drummer boy.
Was,
It's always a drummer boy.
It's always a drummer boy. Didn't have drummer boys then? Was much thirstier and much more wounded. And so, as Philip Sidney said, you have the water.
Yes, and
Though inferior in rank.
Yes.
I think Frank was leading you towards Gunga Din, which was in the wrong direction. At the Battle of Zutphen in 1586, Sir Philip Sidney was dying, in fact did die on the battlefield, and he said, give the water first to this desperately wounded soldier. He's a very considerable gentleman. 2 marks. Now, Denis Norden. O diamond, diamond, thou little knowest the mischief done.
Sounds like Richard Burton looking at that dirty ring. Wasn't that? I don't know who it was, but it's somebody who'd written some work that he'd taken a long time over.
Yes.
And the dog. I won't venture to say how he'd ruined it. He ate it. Let's say he chewed it up or something like that. Who was it?
Was it John Stuart Mill?
No, I don't. I really don't know, Jack.
There were apples falling about as well.
Oh, was it Newton?
Yes.
Essayed levity and got gravity.
I think that was a rather direct job. I think I was given 1.5 out of 2. Sir Isaac Newton said this, or alleged to have said it, to his dog, who knocked over a candle, which in turn set fire to and destroyed the almost finished labours of some years of experiments and calculations. And it's curiously, in a footnote to a poem by a chap called Thomas Maud, who recounts this incident.
If he hadn't got on with the work, apples would still be falling up.
They were absolutely right. Yes, Einstein would have had nothing to do. A score at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, which is a very close one. Frank Muir and Dilys Powell lead by 1/2 of a mark. On our round of origins and derivations, and this time they can confer with each other openly because it's a team effort on each side. For 2 marks in this case, I want to know how these words or phrases originated or were derived. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, yours is Up the Spout.
Come on, Norden, into battle.
What meaning are you going to say for this? Because there's if you've got one up the spout, that can either be in the services, if your rifle was loaded, if you were in the women's services, it was a rather easy way of getting demobbed. I don't know which of those two you want.
There was a particular, I think, Victorian sense in which this was used, and if you...
Would it be up the chimney? Would it be...
No, I think of three brass balls.
Oh, in the knocker shop. I mean, in the pawnbroker shop. It meant you got something in hock, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
That's what I wanted
to take you on one side about that.
Yes, I do realise that. I hope this will be slightly...
The civilian use, up the spout, meant that you pawned something. And this was the bit between the front shop of the pawnbroker and his store at the back, and that was called the spout, or tube, through which your belongings passed, and you were lucky if you ever saw them again. So it goes up the spout, and it can only come down the spout when you've got enough money to redeem the pawn. But Denis is quite right about up the spout with a rifle. The other one, I think, was a brilliant invention, but I'm not certain about that one. Well, Dilys Powell, in fact, your word is skedaddle.
Well,
let us leave this situation in which we're in as fast as possible.
Yes.
Yes.
Without necessarily considering anybody else.
Yes. Before we lose, yes.
Well, you have, in fact, answered, and I'm bound to give you your 2 marks, but it usually said of troops or soldiers, male,
Really?
means decamping or retreating hastily in rout or fleeing. And it was used first by the Americans during the American Civil War, but it's quite probably deriving from a Scottish dialect verb, which meant that when you were carrying milk in a milk pail, you ran so fast that it spilled and slopped over.
No.
I think 2 is all right. Well, now we come to the last round, and we go back to those quotations I gave Frank and Denis at the beginning of the program. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And if you remember, Denis, your quotation is, "Coming events cast their shadows before," which I think is a proverb which is found in Campbell Lochiel's Warn in 1803.
Well, that phrase, word for word, exactly as you heard it, without one syllable altered or twisted, that phrase was the scathing retort I made at the age of 17 to Trent Nugent, who was the artistic director, juvenile lead and theatre lessee of the Willesden Thespians. Now, I must explain that I had joined the Willesden Thespians for only one reason, because at the age of 17, I had extremely sticking out ears. And I mean extremely. With my flat cap on, the silhouette of my head resembled nothing so much as an Austin 7 with the 2 side doors open. Which, of course, made me extremely diffident with girls. And that actually was what made me join the Willesden Thespians, because among young men of that day, there was a very widely held theory that the best possible way to get girls flocking to you was to be the star in an amateur dramatic society. And of all our local amateur dramatic societies, the thespians attracted by far the largest female following. Now this wasn't so much because of the quality of their plays or the standard of their acting. It was due practically completely to the fact that the bloke who printed their posters was a little on the short-sighted side. And this was demonstrated by the enormous crowds that rushed to see their production of Patrick Hamilton's play Rope. And it was a similar error which brought the house full notices out for Ivor Novello's Careless Rapture. But as I say, when I joined them for their winter season, my purpose was quite cold-blooded, to work my way up through the company till I could take the starring role in the Desert Song. I went along at the beginning of the season and presented myself to Trent Nugent. Now there was an insufferable character. Trent was actually in the society more or less all-powerful, and accordingly it was to him I explained that I wanted to end the season as the Red Shadow, but until then I was perfectly willing to work my way up to it. All right, very well, he said. In our first production, we'll just give you a walk-on part. Now that expression, a walk-on part, I took to be the customary theatrical jargon until I saw what the first production was, The Bridge of San Luis Rey. And I was to be the bridge. Apparently some altercation with the scenery builders, which meant that I spent the major part of Thornton Wilder's great work stretched out between two papier-mâché rocks with handrails attached either side of me, being walked on. Nevertheless, I did feel that I'd served the necessary apprenticeship, so when we finally came to the first read-through of the Desert Song, I thrust myself in front of the company, and without prompting, I recited the whole of the Red Shadow part, chucked in a snatch of one alone to call my own, say nothing of two choruses of the riff song. Well, when the rest of the cast broke into spontaneous applause, I could tell that Trent Nugent was really impressed. He said, "That was very good. Very good." He said, "I think," and he handed me a script, "I think you've earned this." And when I looked down at the part circled for me, my gorge leapt. I was third sand dune. I said to him, "Wait a minute. What about the Red Shadow?" He said, "I'm terribly sorry," he said, "but that's quite out of the question. You see, I was cast for that before the season even opened." Well, that was where I made that aforementioned retort. "In that case," I said, "this amateur dramatic society shouldn't call themselves the Willesden Thespians. They should call themselves the Coming Events." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because," I said, without altering or twisting a syllable, I said, "it's coming events cast their shadows before."
It's a very lurid glimpse into Denis's past. And we go on now to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, "A jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou."
I've been asked by the vicar to give some advice on young men about to be married. Now, in 1848, Punch's advice to young men about to be married was don't. But I don't agree with this. I think young men should get married. But if I had to choose one piece of advice, gentlemen, I would say this, that when you get married, you'll find that women have an eccentric attitude towards personal hygiene. Women expect one to bath more than once a month. Now this I totally and absolutely disagree with. I think it's unhealthy and dangerous. The history of baths is rather interesting. Well, it's not very interesting, but I won't go into a lot of historical detail and bore you. I don't know, I might as well. Baths really came from the Persians, like a lot of things, like polo and cats and markets and carpets. The Persians invented mixed bathing. They had men and women in the same bath. The next you hear of it, it popped up in Greece with Archimedes. Archimedes was in the habit of filling his bath right up to the rim and then leaping in. And this slopped all over the bathroom, which eventually led him to measure the amount of water which slopped over, which he discovered equaled his own weight. So he discovered this principle that a body displaces its own weight in water. And also it made the towel so wet that when he chucked it on the bath rail, it pulled the nails out and the bath rail fell off. So he invented the screw. Bathing really started in England in Cornwall, and there they used to bath in the spring. Now we bath or women would have you bath every night. And this can be very dangerous. Now your skin, gentlemen, before you'll get married, your skin is really like a Fair Isle sweater, which covers you in its entirety. It has essential oils in it. It's like a sort of knitted garment keeping your bones from sticking out. And it's sort of edged around with lips to stop your mouth from fraying. And it's got sort of embroidery on top where your hair is. But essentially it's a living, breathing thing full of oil. Now, if you rub over this rancid oil and acid boiled up into a cake, you destroy all these waxes and oils. And just like a Fair Isle thing, and the air can get in, and you know, your ribs will rust. What you need to do is this, gentlemen. Once a month, when your wife is out, strip naked, stand in the bath, and dab yourself lightly with rainwater. It is pure water. Just stick a jug under the drain pipe of the down pipe of the gutter and keep it ready. Dab yourself lightly over your salient features with a little bit of cotton wool moistened with rainwater. Now anything like sort of mud or axle grease that you've got onto, you scrub vigorously with a dry loofah. Not damp, but dry. That will get off all the rough stuff, you see. And then, just to tone up your whole system and get all the sort of dirty marks off, rub yourself with a circular motion with half a stale loaf. Bread is terribly good for absorbing grease, and you can use it for rubbing out pencil. Rub yourself all over, and this will dry off the rainwater and will tone up your whole system. So what I'm saying, gentlemen, my one piece of advice I can give you about to be married is don't go in for this awful pagan bath rubbish. Let's go back to Persia and go back to the words of that marvellous old woman who made the outsized tents, old Ma Cohen. What you need, all nature needs to see a perfect, clean and fragrant body is a jug of rain, a loofah, bread and thou.
I don't know what the shade of Omar Khayyam would think about that one. But by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories, and he and Dilys Powell also, on this evening, win the entire contest.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The program was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. My word. A panel game devised by Tony Schreian and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. And here's your chairman, Jack Longland.
Here's round one, which tests their vocabularies, and for 2 marks, I want you to give me the meaning of the following words. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, yours is mnemonic.
Mnemonic means something which helps you to remember something. A word or phrase or letters or something which would help you to remember.
Remember what?
Another word or phrase or something.
You're dead right. 2 marks. It's the association of ideas, or it can be verses which are easy to remember and keeps some otherwise totally forgettable object in mind. And it's based on the principles of analogy, usually. And it's a Greek word. 2 marks. Denis Norden, Parkinson's law.
Well, work expands to occupy the time and the space of those available to do it.
That's, I think, quite good enough. If there was an earlier one, I don't mind which of the Parkinson. I think there are 3 or 4 or 5 Parkinson laws now. Chap called C. Northcote Parkinson. I think the first one was that the amount of work done is in inverse proportion to the number of people employed, and he was especially referring to public administration. But Denis is quite right. The second law, I think, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. It is very handy for most offices. 2 marks.
Nobody's never put a warm baby on a cold slab.
Well, it's Anne Scott James next. And quintessence.
Means the essential nature of a thing.
Yes. Do you remember how it sort of fits into a category?
Sort of fits into a category.
Well, originally.
Well, it must be a Latin word.
Yes.
And it must mean the 5th nature, the 5th being.
Yes.
The 5th element.
That's it. That's what I wanted. 2 marks. Frank Muir, Gerrymander.
Gerrymander is a German lizard.
You're very much on the right tack.
But it's an American political expression.
Yes.
And it's to do with altering the boundaries of voting districts.
That's right. Yep, absolutely right. Do you remember who did it?
I should think Gerrymander.
You're near enough to be in...
His wife, Sally.
Well, that's what I want. It comes from the name of Governor Elbridge Gerry, who lived between 1744 and 1814, and salamander, because of the likeness to that curious animal of the gerrymandered electoral map of Massachusetts in 1811. So you're quite right. You manipulate the electorate in order to give advantage to your own party. Well, at this point, I give Frank and Denis a quotation to think about for their stories in the last round. And Frank, yours is, Allons, enfants de la patrie, And for you, Denis. And for you, Denis. The female of the species is more deadly than the male. Well, now we have a round of incomplete quotations, and here are some sage sayings by fairly well-known people, but not finished off. 1 mark for finishing the quotation, and 1 mark for identifying its author. Dilys Powell, beware of all enterprises that require blank.
Money.
Money, not do?
No.
Don't like money. They require intelligence.
Well, that's quite a good thing to do, I agree.
Is there an of in there? Is there an of? Is it beware of all, or just beware
Sorry,
of?
beware of all
Beware
enterprises
of.
that require...
No, it isn't money or intelligence. It's belief.
No, it was written by a simple lifer.
A simple lifer.
What, thorough?
Yes. Well done. Now, what do you think Thoreau might have been saying?
Well, he's probably about mousetraps, wasn't he?
No, living in the woods, far from Hardy Amos as he was.
Machinery or something?
No, stick to the Hardy Amos.
Stick to the...
Hardy Amos.
Clothes?
What kind of clothes?
Smart clothes.
Yes. I helped rather a lot here.
Yeah.
I think 1.5. What Thoreau, living in the woods in Walden or Walden, actually said was, beware of all enterprises that require new clothes.
New clothes.
It's a very, very sound motto.
Absolutely. Thoreau's favourite music was wind through telegraph wires.
Yes.
Which writes him off as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, he became a bit dull in later life. It's Denis Norden's turn now. The mass of men live lives of...
The actual quotation is, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation, but today it's diet desperation.
Author? We've had him already.
Was he also Thoreau?
I don't think I help much there. The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. It is Thoreau, an essay on economy in the book Walden. Anne Scott James. Cauliflower is nothing but...
An edible rose.
Well, that's totally
nice,
good.
isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it isn't quite the phrase, but that's roughly the idea that is behind the phrase as a whole.
A flower you put manure on.
I wouldn't go on with that.
Would you go on with the floral side?
No, it's a chap who had a job on the Mississippi. I don't know how to help him.
Mark Twain?
Yes.
Mark Twain.
Cauliflower is nothing but. Now, think of the sort of thing he might have said.
Well, sir.
Cabbage.
Yes, go on.
Cabbage with knobs on.
Well, very nearly, yes. Academic knobs on.
Yes.
With a hat on.
Cabbage with pretension.
Yes, that's right, you're getting there. 1.5 again. What Mark Twain actually said was, cauliflower is nothing but cabbage with a college education.
Oh, it's very good, very good.
Now, Frank Muir. A man cannot have a pure mind who...
Goes mixed bathing. Is it that kind?
It's a bit more gastronomic than that.
Oh, is it one of these, Sidney Smith?
Now, he probably ate them as a wedding guest.
Lateral, I felt.
If he wasn't beating his breast.
Coleridge.
Yes. Now, let's think what Coleridge might have finished
It wasn't
the quotation.
boiled albatross, was it?
Well, it's in that order, but not quite so full of protein as that.
A pie.
It's almost a pie. A man...
Almost a pie.
A man... Well, you listen to what I say and you'll agree. It's a very small kind of pie, and a rather special one. A man cannot have a pure mind who refuses apple dumplings. That is apparently said by Coleridge, but it's reported in writing by Charles Lamb in an essay of his called Grace Before Meal. 1 out of 2. That gives us, ladies and gentlemen, an interim score in which just ahead, Denis Norden and Anne Scott James are leading by 1 mark. Now a round of origins and derivations, and this time it's a team effort, which means that they can officially both answer at once on one side. 2 marks if the teams can tell me how the following words or phrases originated or were derived. We begin with Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, and your word is juggernaut, or it can be juggernaut. That is either J-U-G-G-E-R-N-A-U-T or J-A-G-G-A-N-A-T-H.
Have you finished?
Yeah. Have to do my spelling.
It's an Elizabethan word meaning an empty picture.
No mark so far.
You know it's modern corruption, don't you?
Yes, but adding to Frank's admirable solution, it's an Indian word.
Yes.
And it means those damn great, not a lorry driven by internal combustion, but drawn by people. It's a great big thing
dragged along, under which people threw themselves.
Yes, but what was on the car?
Oh,
Krishna.
Yes.
It's
some kind of an Indian
nasty,
god.
huge, great.
Yes.
Oh, huge, not just
Yes,
huge,
no,
but
no,
huge, great
yes, yes.
Indian idol.
Yes.
Krishna.
So which was Juggernaut?
What? Oh, yeah?
Which was Juggernaut?
Well, it was about a 40-wheeled car.
No, this is where you're going wrong. And Frank's very nearly right.
It was the god on it, was it?
Well, yes, the god. It's not the god. No,
Yes, not
no,
the
not the god.
god.
It's Krishna.
Yes, the god on it.
All right, 1.5. This is Hindu god, regarded as the remover of sin, though it means lord of the world, and at a town called Puri in Orissa, he was on view only 3 days. They washed him the first day, and he caught a terrible cold, and for 10 days nobody was able to look at him at all. And he was then taken, at the end of that, in his enormous decorated car to the temple, and then taken back again and was out of circulation for a year. And the fanatics used, because he was an object of great devotion, every now and then to throw themselves under the wheels of this enormous car and get crushed to death. Now, Scott, James and Denis, it's your turn. Why should a red herring be a fox's friend?
Well, a red herring is a false scent or false trail, and I suppose a fox, poor hunted creature, would welcome his pursuers going down a false trail.
Yes.
That's in Sweden. They've got, I'm trying to remember what the name of it is, but they have a thing where they bury the herring in the ground for a year. If you did that, it would not only put the hounds off the scent, it would it would get all the hunt and the anti-blood sports league cantering off in the other direction as well.
It's right. A smoked and salted herring, allegedly, if you draw it across the trail of scent left by a fox, the hounds simply lose the scent and go tracing the red herring as well. Nowadays, I believe they use aniseed, the League Against Cruel Sports, so they've got a number of red herrings about. 2 marks. So
you have aniseed in a sort of official drag, don't you?
You do as well, yes. But if you do it, drag it across the
But
trail
now,
of the
why,
day.
if this is an old phrase, should it have been done? Because nobody disapproved of fox hunting until relatively recently, did they?
Well, there might have been rival masters of the fox
Do you think
hounds.
so? Trying to, I see, keep the foxes in their spinnies.
Yeah, sure.
Is a hunt ball after drag hounds called a drag ball?
If anything was a red herring, it's that last remark of Frank's. And now we come to the last round, and we go back to those quotations I gave Frank and Denis at the beginning of the programme. And on this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And if you remember, Frank, your quotation is Allons, enfants de la patrie, l'heure de gloire est arrivée, which is the opening line of the Marseillaise. Frank.
I had this nasty experience a year ago in a trouser shop. It was just off the Kensington High Street, and it was a rather modern shop, which I hadn't realised. And when I took the selected trousers in to change them, to try them on, it didn't have a proper closing to the changing room. They had a pair of extremely inadequate sort of cowboy saloon doors, about 18 inches deep. I don't know what the height of a normal trouser try-on is, but it's not 6'6", which I am. And the vulnerable area was in grave danger. Throughout this thing, I suddenly realised I couldn't, if I'd worn thick socks, I would have been arrested. It was that. And do you realise you have to bob down to take your trousers off and put new ones on? I couldn't. And then the awful thing was that when I was struggling in there, suddenly with mounting horror, I realised that it was a bisexual place. There were women in there, sitting down and looking vaguely in my direction. Eventually I staggered up. I honestly had to have a sit down. I had a come over. The nerves were twanging, and I was lying there with the eyes closed, and a voice said, "You don't look too well. I can place on the hands. I cure things by just placing my hands on them, and then I think to myself, Allons enfants de la patrie, and there's a sudden surge of spirit through my fingertips, and my fingertips tremble, and whoever I'm touching and caressing is cured. He sat down beside me and said, my card. And it said, Alonso de Quinsy. I said, what do you cure? Do you cure people? He said, no, well, not yet. I haven't actually cured a person. That's why I was hoping I could try with you. My Auntie Ethel's glad. I said, well, no doubt she would be. No. He said, glad, gladioli. Auntie's glad was all wilting. And I looked at it. And the wandered up a tree. Tingle, tingle, tingle went the fingertips. I stroked it. It was lovely, lovely. She could have won a prize, a Chelsea flower show with it. I said, well, thank you for the card, Mr. Alonso de Quinsy. Should I ever need you? This was about a year ago, you see. And by heavens, only this morning we needed him. We've had a terrible year, I don't know about you, but this disastrous year in the garden. It started off with the front gate getting Dutch elm disease. Well, it was, because the white paint turned yellow and the top bar sort of crumbled away, which is a symptom of Dutch elm disease. It dies from the top. And all the roses alongside the drive suffered from the flu. We got all central heating, and the flu is just by the roses. And the oil sort of dragged and fell down on them. They all sort of died off. And the lawn, something very peculiar happened during the summer with the lawn. It's round about sort of July, when things were usually growing rather fiercely. And my wife said, do you realise we haven't cut the lawn for 7 weeks? It's not growing. It's got that new mown look. I said, do you realise what that lawn's suffering from? Pneumonia. And it didn't grow. It just sort of then went brown. But the worst blow was our pears. We've got this fantastic old pear tree. And when these are really ripe, I mean, the whole neighbourhood gathers for our pears. But this year, awful mottled leaves, no pears, little sort of round things with spots. My wife said, it thinks it's a crabapple tree. I said, that pear tree's had a nervous breakdown. Of all things. She said, well, we could never save it now. And I said, yes, there was just a chance in a million. A year ago, I met a man who I think could do this. I've got his card somewhere. Rushed upstairs to the suit I wear when I go up to town. One with turnouts and buttons. There was his card, Alonso de Quinsy. Lay honour of hands. No address. So, my only hope is that he's listening tonight. So, Mr. de Quinsy, if you are listening tonight, please will you react just once more to that stirring call which does so well. Alonso, fondle our pear tree.
We shall be breaking off diplomatic relations tomorrow, but we'll go on to Denis and his storyline, which, if you remember, was the female of the species is more deadly than the male.
You may have heard, mainly because Frank and I keep on mentioning it, that they've now published a book of these My Word stories. Well, one consequence of that is that over the past few weeks, we've both been rather involved in what they call the promotion of this book. So the publishers decided that they'd send me round the country making speeches at literary luncheons. The theory being that these speeches would so convulse all present with helpless laughter, they'd rush into the foyer and snatch up copies of the book by the armful, you see. And that was the theory. But one thing wrong with the theory, and that's the word luncheon. You see, all my life, I've been the victim of what my mother calls a delicate stomach. any unfamiliar kind of food, and the whole of my internal workings go into a rhythmical kind of side-to-side lurching, like worn-out windscreen wipers. Everything inside, flump, flump, from one side to another. Because I eat indigestion tablets like other people eat grapes. Now, bearing that fact in mind, let me tell you the kind of meal you get at these literary luncheons. Generally, it's a sort of beige-coloured soup, roast chicken, ice cream, coffee, all served at the same temperature. Which is why, after making 18 of these speeches in 12 major cities, the number of books purchased after the meal amounted to no more than 1. And that was only because I had nothing to read on the train going back. Well, the publishers, naturally, they got rather sniffy about this. So prior to the luncheon they booked for me in Cornwall, I sent them a letter apologising. I said, I'm sorry, but if strange foods upset me, what can I do? And by return I received a 3-word telegram. Don't eat it. They're not mugs, these publishers. I thought that is a good idea. So in that quaint old Cornish town, I pleaded religious grounds and sat through the whole meal without touching a crumb. And you know, by the time the lady chairman got up to introduce me, I felt marvellous. And she said, ladies, she said, we have a real treat in store today. Someone who in this troubled and darkening world is going to bring us the precious gift of laughter. But before I ask him to set us all rocking with his hilarious quips, I have one official duty to perform. Would you all please rise and stand for one moment's silent tribute to our honorary secretary who died last night in such tragic circumstances? Then, for the longest 60 seconds in recorded history, that whole gathering stood up with heads bowed in a silence that was broken only by the occasional sob. The moment they sat down, Madam Chairman announced, and here he is then, the irrepressible funster, Mr. Denis Norden. Well, just looking across at that sea of faces, many of them with the tears still trickling down their youth-due blush on, I felt a familiar sensation inside. Windscreen wipers. At this time, even worse than on the occasions when I'd eaten the grub. So when the publishers wrote to me asking me why it was that not only had nobody in Cornwall bought a copy of the book after the meal, but 4 ladies had asked if they could return theirs, my reply was terse and to the point. Given the choice, I said, I'd rather partake of the meal than suffer the kind of introduction that this lady had given me. Or, as I actually put it in the telegram, the female of the speeches is more deadly than the meal.
And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story, and he and Dilys Powell also just win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.
You've been listening to My Word from the BBC, heard each week at this time. This is the WFMT Fine Arts Network.
My Word. A panel game devised by Tony Schreier and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words. And here's your chairman, Jack Longland.
Well, here's round one, which tries to test their vocabulary. For 2 marks, can you give me the meaning of the following words? Anne Scott James, pragmatic.
It's an adjective, Jack.
Yes? Good start.
Well, pragma is Greek for a thing, so it means of a thing like nature.
Yes?
Connected with a thing.
Well,
If you deal with a thing pragmatically, I think it means you deal with it by circumstances rather than according to principles or ideas. Would that do?
It'll do very nicely indeed, Anne. Well done. It can be used, Anne, in a rather disapproving sense. Somebody can be frightfully opinionated or dogmatic, and you call him pragmatic too. But you get your two. Frank Muir, quasar, Q-U-A-S-A-R, quasar.
Yes, it comes from a Greek root, like turnips. It also means
Latin would be better.
stellar.
Yes, that would be better.
Quasi. Is anything to do with quasi?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Well, quasi
means it isn't quite a star, but
yes. Well, quasi, yes, means it has all
Starlit.
the outward appearance.
It's more or less stars.
A star, but
yes.
not quite.
Yes. A kind
A
of...
quasar is a thing that you might take for a star, but in fact isn't. Because it's something else. A moment.
What else does it do?
What else does it do? Many things.
It puzzles me.
It twinkles.
It
doesn't twinkle.
No, it doesn't twinkle.
It doesn't twinkle. First of all, grip on that stuff. It doesn't twinkle.
It doesn't twinkle. It puzzles us all a great deal.
And it moves. Doesn't move. No. It's immobile in the heaven.
I'm going to give you 1 out of 2. You're struggling fairly desperately.
No.
Go on for hours.
It's a word coined by astronomers. It stands for quasi-stellar object, which is a very remote and enormously radiating or luminous celestial body. And most of the quasars, they think, are not in our galaxy at all, but something like 8,000 million light years away, and are removing themselves from us, you needn't bother in the next program, at very nearly the speed of light. Quasars, 1 mark. Dilys Powell, your word is shibboleth. S-H-I-B-B-O-L-E-T-H. Shibboleth.
Well, it's something which is forbidden. It's a forbidding.
No.
It's a kind of taboo.
It wasn't a kind of password.
That's right.
Don't pass, friends. Not friend. Don't pass.
Yes, you get your 2. It comes in the book of Judges in the Bible. It's a word by which the Gileadites under Jephthah were able to identify the foe, who are the Ephraimites, who couldn't say S-H, sh. And because they couldn't, the enemy gave themselves away. But to a large extent, Dilys is right too, it then became to mean the catchword of a group or an old-fashioned doctrine which was once thought essential is not now all that essential. So I think you just get your 2.
3?
No. Denis Norden, yours is syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Very modish words tonight, haven't we?
Yeah.
It sounds like a sort of ice rink you can hire out for orgies. But, I think actually it's generally used incorrectly. It's one of those words where they use it as though it's synonymous with the symptom, but it isn't. I think a syndrome is a collection of symptoms
Absolutely
which
right.
go together to form some kind of malady, whereas you generally say it's generally used as applying to one symptom, actually, in leader writers' things.
No, dead right, Denis. That's good. It also means just a set of concurrent things of any kind. And though this is terribly fashionable nowadays, the use of this word, the metaphorical rather than the medical use of this word starts right back in the 17th century, in 1661. So this is one of these curiously cyclical words which has become fashionable once again after a lapse of about 3 centuries. 2 marks. Well, this is the moment in which I give Denis and Frank quotations for them to think about for their stories in the last round. And Denis, yours is ships that pass in the night, and for Frank Muir, there is no fire without some smoke. The next is a round of origins and derivations of words, and this is officially a team effort. That is, they can help each other openly rather than doing it rather sort of privately as they've been doing up till now. 2 marks. I want the teams to tell me how the following words originated or were derived. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, yours is lackadaisical.
You back first.
Well, I would say it comes from lackaday, which is sort of Elizabethan for oh hell. They would say, oh, lackaday.
That's right.
We would say, oh hell, or worse.
You're absolutely right. Just to clear it up, and you don't lose any marks.
Well, you wake up in the morning and everything is rather miserable, so
Yeah.
you just sort of slope around and moon about and you don't put energy into things.
That's the other half of it.
Short
Yep.
of a daisy.
No, 2 marks straight away. It means languid or sentimental, affectedly pensive, and it does come, as Denis quite rightly said, from the phrase lackaday or alackaday, an exclamation of regret or sorrow. Woe be to this day, because the most terrible things are going to happen to me during the course of the day. 2 marks. Dilys, Powell and Frank, yours is manure.
Origin is the horse.
Handworking.
Yes.
Oh, surely not.
Yes, it is.
It's a shovel job as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think, yes. All right.
Manual work.
Man.
Yes, a particular kind of manual working. Put that into Latin and you're all right, I think.
Does it mean to work?
Yes.
To dig the soil?
Yes.
There we are.
The original French was main œuvre, which meant handwork, became main œuvre, meaning to work with the hands, and therefore doing the job of cultivation and agriculture by manual labor, and hence, only by derivation, became the kind of obvious and ordinary dressing that you had to apply to cultivated land. So that the Anglo-French word maneuver really meant spreading the muck on the soil.
Oh, that is nice, isn't it? Army manoeuvres. Oh, that is very felicitous thought.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a round of differences for the gentlemen present about topics of feminine general knowledge and vice versa for the ladies. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, what is the difference between stand at ease and stand easy?
Oh, we can't have help for this, I suppose.
No. No help at all.
Well, surely stand at ease must be what the Sergeant Major shouts at the
He does, yes.
drill squad, isn't it?
Absolutely right, but what
Drill.
does he want you to do?
And they then put their heels apart and thump their rifles butt end down on the ground. No good.
Yes, that's near enough. But what about stand easy?
I think it means we're losing this battle. Run off home, chum.
That's the one thing you can't do. Anything else, almost, you can do, but not run. Stand at ease, a position less rigid than attention, with the feet apart and the hands joined behind the back. But stand easy means complete freedom of bodily movement, short of moving the feet from the stand at ease position.
Sort of swaying from the hips.
Sway from the hips as much as you like, and touch your toes, anything you like, but not move your feet. Frank Muir, pearl and plain.
No problem there. I taught myself knitting once when I was very young. Not all that young, sort of fairly very young. They're two different terms. They're the sort of basic stitches. And in the first one, you in plain, you put the wool over the end of the needle. Then you sort of tuck the bit of the needle back and hoik out a loop. And then shove the left-hand bit over and then shove it on the right-hand needle. And in pearl, you don't. With the result that my plane was sort of fairly even with holes in it. If you did pearl, it's bumpy.
I'm going to give 1 3/4 marks this time.
You'll need one of those little pocket electric calculators.
Now, Dilys Powell, and with no help from Frank Muir, AC and DC.
That's electricity. One is alternating current and the other is direct current.
So there.
And what, Dilys, does that mean?
Oh, come on, I'm not an electrician. Well, alternating current sort of does that, and direct current does that.
That's what I wanted. Direct current flows in one direction only. Alternating current is a current that periodically changes its direction in a perfectly regular fashion. And that's what we have most of.
Stitch.
2 marks. 2 marks. Denis Norden, organdie and tulle.
Well, I didn't do dressmaking when I was younger, no matter how much younger. Tulle, which is not always pronounced with that sort of twee accent that you gave it.
I was going very carefully.
I know. Dressmakers say, give us the tulle and we'll finish the job. I think...
Organdie is usually cotton, isn't it?
That's right.
Oh, is it?
Tulle is usually silk, but I think you could
That's
have
right.
a cotton tulle, but I think...
You didn't originally, I don't think.
No, agreed.
Well, they're such a good team. I'll give them 1 3/4 again. Organdie is a woven muslin, that is cotton fabric, whereas tulle is or used to be a bobinette silk, fine silk. And they come from Toul in France and Musolo in what used to be called Mesopotamia. Well, now we come to the last round. And so we go back to those quotations which I gave Denis and Frank at the beginning of the program. On this occasion, the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Denis, your quotation is ships that pass in the night.
Ships that pass in the night. I'd like to talk to you about this whole business of taking one's clothes off in public in front of an audience. The first thing I'd like to make clear is that I am not against nudity. Well, not as often as I'd like to be. What does get me a bit irritated is the way people flock to see nude actors and actresses these days. If I seem to be a bit incensed, not to say incoherent on this subject, is because of that quotation, ships that pass in the night, because it brought back to my mind a very painful occasion when Frank and I faced the possibility of having to appear before the public in the nude. And although it was many years ago, the memory is still painful because it was a time when our joint career was at its lowest financial ebb. We were now at a period when we chewed our pencils, it wasn't for inspiration, it was for sheer nourishment. We were starving, and the first priority, obviously, was to earn some kind of money somehow, even if it meant taking a part-time job. So, we spent our last penny on a copy of the local paper, and we went down the list of part-time vacancies on offer. And then I saw it. It was an advert for the art courses being run at the local evening institute. And underneath the bit about enrolling Thursday, it said, model required for life class. That's it, I said to Frank. That would suit you to a T. All you have to do is just sit there. That's why it's in the column that's called Sits Vacant. And Frank said, hang on. He said, but I'd have to sit there naked, wouldn't I? I'd have to take all my clothes off. I said, now just a minute. I said, really, I said, there is nothing to be ashamed of in the human body. He said, it's not my body I'm thinking about, it's my vest. Well, he did take quite a bit of persuading, but when I finally rang up the institute and described Frank to them in detail, the chap at the other end sounded quite keen. So the following Thursday, off Frank went, and I tiddled about at the typewriter, putting the final touches to the opera libretto we were currently engaged on writing, and which we'd call Amal and the Health Visitors. Well, much sooner than I expected, there was a key in the door, and then in strode Frank. I said, hello. You're back early. What is it? They ran out of rose madder, did they? He'd never hit me before. When I picked myself up, he was holding the local paper in front of my swelling eye. Read it, he said. Read it, there. The day. I looked down and said, well, what's wrong with it? It says enrollment Thursday. Today's Thursday. Enrollment, he said, is done in the front office. The class itself is on a Tuesday. I said, oh. He said, I went in the back door and I got undressed and I strolled into the classroom, climbed on top of the desk and totally nude took up the position of Rodin's The Thinker. Do you know which class was in session there? I shook my head. His finger stabbed at the paper again. I read it. Every Thursday night, flower arranging. Now perhaps you can see why I'm not all that happy about the current trends towards nudity in public entertainment. It's not the public that I worry about. It's the people who take their clothes off in front of them. As Longfellow very delicately described them, the shapes that pose in the knout.
We go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his storyline was, there is no fire without some smoke.
I have a sad story to tell. I feel I owe it to the world to explain why there was no annual Christmas bazaar in Thorpe Village Hall this Christmas. I think a word of explanation, of description of this Christmas fair is called for here. As you go in, it was always the same every Christmas, as you go in, there was a table marked jumble. And on that were the following. There was one slightly rusty golf club with a string curling off the handle. There was a pair of bookends, one missing, which is about as useful as one sock. There was a biscuit barrel in pottery with the knob missing from the lid and the brass showing through the chromium. There was a paper knife in the shape of a Toledo sword which could best be described as in old rolled gold with the gold rolled off. There was an unused desk diary for 1947, and there were a number of books. There was always The Gorilla Hunters by R.M. Ballantyne, and in the front was a book plate from Strood School saying 1924 presented to R. Thwaites for effort. There was a book called Rambles in New Zealand. There's a book called Hiawatha rendered into Latin. And the last one was Hindustani self-taught by the natural method. Now, you may wonder why I know exactly what things were going to be on the jumble stall. Well, they were there every year. When I first went to the village 20 years ago, about the second year, I bought the biscuit barrel and kept it for, I thought I'd keep tobacco in it. And Mrs. Rumbold came round to collect for the next jumble sale and explained to me the system. She said, those things are for buying and passing on. They're not for using. You may probably thinking, well, why do you go to the Thorpe Annual Christmas Fair? Well, we go because of one item which I haven't mentioned. Because the vicar always makes a little speech to start with and makes his annual joke about none but the brave deserve the fair. You know. And then he introduces the official opener, who is a donkey. Philomel the donkey. And then comes in this absolutely marvellous thing. It's two chaps inside a donkey, the Sam Baxter and his brother Ted. And they lollop in, pretending to be the official opener, and they've been doing it for 32 years. And people have grown up, and their sons have grown up with Philomel the donkey. It doesn't diverge its pattern by an inch year after year. It lollops in through the door of the village hall and does a neigh at its front end. Then it waggles its tail, and then it does a tap dance to Mrs. Baxter on the piano. And this is why the village fete continues. And it can't, well, the tragedy this year was old Sam Baxter came to see me and said, could I have a word with ye? He's about 70. I said, yeah. He said, well, Philomel is no more. She's gone, the old... I said, what? The donkey? What's wrong? What's happened? What went wrong? He said, well, I was rehearsing with young Ted. It's his younger brother, he's 64. He said, we got started. I hear a very funny noise, and I get a premonition something's wrong. I said, Ted, what are you doing now? He said, I'm just lighting a fag. And at that moment, there was this blinding agony behind me. Terrible pain. I leapt forward, and there was a tearing sound, and the skin had come apart. The old Philomel had come in too. The conflagration was all right. I just sat in a basin of water and put that out, but the old skin is no more. The donkey is no more. I couldn't get rid of her myself. I took her along to the road sweeper. He was clearing the autumn leaves out of the drain just opposite the Red Lion, and I got him to put her down. So there's no more Philomel world, and there will be no more Thorpe Christmas Fair, because as sure as eggs is eggs, as the proverb said 400 years ago, there is no fair without Sam's Moke.
Ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the contest of the two stories, but the other team of Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win the entire contest of My Word, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Round one is a vocabulary test. 2 marks if you can give me the meaning of these words approximately correctly.
No problem.
I'll try. Dilys Powell. The meaning of the word, please, Dilys, spelt C-A-B-L-E-S-S.
C-A-B-L-E-S-S.
Yes.
That's what I am, and I can't get a cab.
Exactly right.
Don't add another syllable.
Cabless is without or unprovided with a cab for purposes of transportation. And that happens to Dilys on her way quite often. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what does the verb mean to Google? G-O-O-G-L-E. To Google.
To Google?
Yep.
Is it somewhere halfway between a gurgle and a gargle? In other words, is it an emitted sound?
No,
Or a
it isn't.
goggle and an ogle, an emitted glance.
Yeah.
Yes, a glance might be the result. Think of sport.
A googly.
Googly. To perform a googly.
And would you like to have a shot at what performing a googly is?
Yes, it's a way of bowling a ball, in which, now in my day, it was all down to jumping up at the wicket, glaring at the chap, and then twisting your fingers round the way that you never did twice the same way.
Yes.
And the purpose was to try and get an off break and a leg break.
Yes, that's
at
right.
the same time, but you never did. It just went clean over the bloke's head.
Well done. Very good, Dennis. That's 2 marks. It's a cricketing term, to bowl a googly, to bowl an off-break ball with an apparent leg break action, which, of course, defeats the wretched batsman if you do it rightly, as Dennis says, you don't always do it. 2 marks.
And a Chinaman goes the other way.
A Chinaman is an off-break bowled by a left-handed bowler at a right-handed batsman. Now, Anne Scott James. And what is a surpeach? S-U-R-P-E-A-C-H. Surpeach.
Something goes on top of something.
It does,
isn't
yes.
it?
Custard.
It is. I think it's face powder. It's something which goes over your peachy complexion.
I'll give you 1 out of 2. It's an ornament. Usually it was a jewel, the kind that you wore on the front and on the top of your turban. Surpeach. Frank Muir, what is Marowski or a Marowski?
In 1812, when the French forces under Napoleon had to retreat from Moscow in the rigours of a Russian winter, in the morning, that's what they woke up to find themselves frozen to.
A nice thought.
Didn't they eat sort of Polish marrows?
No, I don't get... It is Polish, but I don't think the marrow's, that kind of marrow is going to help you.
It's a dance.
No, Frank, you did this rather well yourself when you said she conks to stupor.
The Spoonerism.
Yes?
The Spoonerism is named after Dr. Spooner.
Yes, not necessarily only.
No, but presumably this is a Polish Dr. Spooner who also did the same kind of transferring the initial letters of words.
That's what I wanted. 1 out of 2. This is a... It was a deformed, invented language in which the initial consonants of words coming next to each other, contiguous words, are transposed. And as Frank quite rightly said, the Reverend W.A. Spooner was very famous for doing this, like kinkering kongs their titles take. And Marowski is said to come, I'm not absolutely certain about this, from a Polish Count Marau or Marow. Before we begin the next round, I read out a quotation for each team to write down, and the two women members will, I hope, go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, yours is "Our antagonist is our helper." And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is "Deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil." And then in the last round I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. We come now to a round of misquotations. Some of the lines of poetry I'm going to read out are deliberately misquoted. 2 marks for correcting the quotation, and a bonus mark for saying where the quotation comes from. And Dilys Powell, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, aren't you worried that you might set the flipping trees alight?"
Well, it's William Blake in the right order. First, that's something about thy awful symmetry, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
What's something hand formed thy awful symmetry?
Yes, you're getting very close to it.
And tigers with a Y.
Burning bright. Burning in the night.
Tiger spelt with a Y.
Yes,
that's
that's how they do it.
Yes.
I think 2.5 out of the 3. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? It's Blake, the tiger, comes out of his songs of experience. Now, Denis Norden. "It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of 3. The other 2 went walking on, the one he stopped was me."
It's The Ancient Mariner by Coleridge. And he had a grey beard and a glittering eye.
Yes.
Stop at 1 and 3. Something about his grey beard describes him. His grey beard and his glittering eye, and something about "Why stoppest thou me?"
Good enough. That'll do. Just to get it quite straight for the record, it's an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of 3. By thy long grey beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stops thou me? It's the opening lines of Coleridge's Ancient Mariner.
Samuel Butler said that he wonders whether this poem would really have had the immortality that it's had if it had been called The Old Sailor.
I think there's a lot in that. It's very archaic. Words are used all the way through.
You can't have your archaic and eat it, too.
Now Anne Scott James's turn. Anne, "Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. I prefer such dreamless slumbers, nightmares almost make me scream." Poet, have a shot of that.
Longfellow.
That's right. Yeah. I wanted. Have a shot of the...
Oh, you do it. Go on,
no,
then.
I don't. Beyond Longfellow and Footsteps in the Sands of Time.
Yes, that's right.
Got beyond that.
Well, give us an 1/8 of a mark and let it go.
2, I think. That's right. It goes like this. "Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem." Longfellow's Psalm of Life. Now, Frank Muir. I remember the house where I was born. It overlooked a bookstall where my daddy bought his porn."
This is this unpleasant round where the compiler gets all the laughs.
Exactly.
And you just have to come in with a dull answer. It's that absolutely superb versifier, that English grand master of light verse, terrific satirist, very funny writer, Tom Hood.
Yes.
Early part of the 19th century. And it's a song called "I Remember," one of these sad songs of lost innocence.
Yes.
And it goes, I remember the house where I was born, the little window where the sun came peeping in at dawn."
Absolutely right, except the last word.
Not a wink, morn.
Morn.
Not a wink too soon.
Good, well done, Frank. That's 3 marks. Thomas Hood. And around now for origins and derivations, for 2 marks, I want you to tell me how these words originated or were derived. Dilys Powell, flibbertigibbet.
It means somebody who's a bit sort of airy-fairy.
Yes, that's all right. But it comes from something rather different. Try King Lear.
King Lear? Oh, his fool?
Yes, the fool was plagued by the foul fiend flibbertigibbet. Now, that help you at all?
Well, the foul fiend flibbertigibbet was a kind of foul fiend who lured one on, I think. Doesn't he? He lures one on in Lear.
Yes,
he does
right.
lure them on.
Well, there are quite a lot of them, but he was one of 5. 1 out of 2, I think. But flibbertigibbet was one of 40 fiends which were cast out by the Jesuits in the 16th century, and the Jesuits identified flibbertigibbet as this kind of mischievous gossip that it's now become a frivolous, restless person. But he was one of the 5 fiends that possessed poor Tom, who was the supposed fool, Edgar and King Lear. And flibbertigibbet was a nasty fiend, gave you squint eyes, hair, lip, and pins and needles. 1 out of 2. Denis Norden, balderdash.
Well, it means nonsense. It's a word you use to refute an assertion. It looks as though it comes from bal, which is French for a ball or carnival, de, and then we're left with dash. Well, that's all right. If you have French people have lots of. If you have the name like Jean-Pierre, it has a dash in the middle. So it could be that somebody called Jean-Pierre sent out an invitation to a ball, and they missed out his name on it and just printed the dash. So whoever received it was a nonsense. It was rubbish. It was.
Do you remember a word? All right, 1 out of 2. It does mean a jumbled mixture of ideas, nonsense, senseless talk. It can mean foul language. But originally it was the froth on the top of the tankard, froth on a liquid, or a mixture of things which ought never to be put together, like beer and milk. 1 out of 2. And Scott James, tuxedo, and I mean an article of clothing.
Well, it is a dinner jacket.
Yes.
A man's sort of old-fashioned, stiff-shirted dinner jacket.
And how did it come so to be called?
Well, no, it's American in origin.
Yes.
There's a place called Tuxedo, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
There's a place called Tuxedo Park, just near New York.
That's the one. There was a tuxedo club which lived at this place that Anne has described quite rightly, Tuxedo Park near New York. But a funny chap called Mr. Griswold Lorillard in 1886 introduced for the first time a dinner jacket which he'd brought from England. Up till that time they'd all worn tails all the time, probably even while shooting, but I'm not certain about that. 1.5. Frank Muir, sideburn.
Sideburn, by a curious inversion, came from a gentleman called Burnside.
Yes.
Who was, in fact, a rather inefficient American army general in the 19th century.
Yes.
But I think really what made it popular was he was a funny character, wearing this curious beard in which the chin is naked and the hair forms a kind of H on the face with a huge moustache, and the beard split in 2 and worn beneath the ears. Sort of mutton chop whiskers and a huge moustache.
I think, Frank, it does refer to the side whisker part of it rather than to the moustache in the middle, and therefore sideburns became side whiskers. 2 marks. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, and Scott James, can you give me the origin of yours, which was our antagonist is our helper?
No, I should think it might be Disraeli.
A little earlier. And
political speaker.
Yeah, political speaker, political writer. In 18th century, definitely.
I should think it's Edmund Burke.
That's good enough. 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of yours, deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Sounds to me like one of those things you renounce in the prayer book.
Mm-hmm. It comes from the litany in the Book of Common Prayer. Renounce all the deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So we go back to Denis Norden and his phrase, our antagonist is our helper.
One day last summer, the lady who is, I think, my favourite aunt was sharing a taxi with two other ladies from her town's women's guild, and when it drew up outside where they wanted to go, she looked at the meter, and then she said to the driver, "Oh dear, would you mind driving round another 5 pence worth? 3 into 40 doesn't go." Now, I was suddenly reminded of that incident the other day because I was trying to puzzle my way through a book called Lateral Thinking. And the author, Mr. De Bono, puts forward this theory that every problem today has become so complicated that it's no use trying to solve anything by using the old-fashioned straight line of reasoning from A to B, from point A to point B. What mankind has to learn to do now is to make mental jumps sideways to point C. No, neither could I. But while I was trying to work out exactly what a mental jump sideways was, I suddenly realized it's Auntie Aggie. Let me try and describe my Auntie Aggie. You'll be sitting with her in a very cozy sort of silence when suddenly she'll say, "I just cannot understand people who never keep brown paper in the house." do you see what I mean? Her mind makes jumps. Mentally, she doesn't seem to need the same bridges that we need, particularly when it comes to anything that we, or the rest of mankind, regard as natural laws. There's a Met Office man called Bert Ford, for instance. Every time he appears on television, she says, "Oh, I like him. We always get better weather when he does it." Now, it's that kind of thinking that every now and again gives me this rather vague prickling at the back of my neck. Perhaps this aunt of mine, it just could be that, like the first fish that crawled out of the water onto dry land, my own Aunt Aggie is actually a link in the evolutionary chain. The first one whose mind moves only to point C. In other words, where that lateral thinking that Mr. De Bono is urging upon all of us is concerned, my family may have a distinct advantage because, as Edmund Burke very nearly put it, our Aunt Agnes is our helper.
Aunt Agnes is somebody we should all like to meet very much indeed, I think. We now go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil."
An incredible number of listeners have written to me asking for a report on the progress of my Afghan puppy, Lady Otterline Mole. And I really mean an incredible number. Do you know how many letters I got? 1. The letter was from an anonymous lady who signed herself Dog Lover, and she wondered whether calling my puppy Lady Otterline had produced an effect in the puppy, and said, "Has the puppy any sort of curious traits, any curious patterns of behaviour?" Well, I think it has, really. I think it's got sort of 4 items of behaviour worthy of interest. She loves a good book, but she chews any printed matter. And a couple of days ago, I'd got 4 very expensive seats for the new musical show about Queen Victoria. £2.50 a throw that was, and there were 4 tickets in an envelope, delivered by the postman, put on the table. 3 seconds later, little corner of an envelope left. No tickets, just the stamp and Keep Britain Tidy. Lady Otterline has a passion for leather, and only the other day she chewed round the edge of my shoe. And I went to a conference at the BBC, and at a particularly crucial moment, I crossed my leg, and my shoe opened in front of me, and little nails formed. It looked like a dolphin reaching for a herring. Third, Ottie doesn't drink from her bowl. She never drinks water from her bowl. She drinks from the downstairs loo. Not only that, she's taught her mother to drink from the downstairs loo, and her elderly poodle aunt. Now, I'm nothing against this. I mean, there it is. It's pure, clean water. But I do object to queuing up. And the other morning I came down and found her playing and chewing a rather largish green plastic ball. And I could hear the overflow going. And she chewed the ball cock off the downstairs loo. We had to switch it off, and now it won't flush. Point 4. Cather Ottie. Ottie nibbles dangling things. And I've got an old duffel coat, which I wear when it's very cold. And she leaps up, and she doesn't sort of eat the thing. She just sinks her teeth in and sort of serrates it. So I've got a sort of deckle-edged duffel coat. So those are the 4 points that idiosyncratic points of my puppy Ottie. Now, how does it range up with Lady Otterline, after whom she was named? Lady Otterline was an aristocratic patron of the arts in the early part of this century. Now, she befriended young literary men, and one of them she defended was Lytton Strachey. Now, Lytton Strachey was all against this great figure of Queen Victoria and the idea of the Victorian being a sort of grand monarchy against which no criticism should be levelled. And he rather sort of cut that away. And I think that the real Lady Otterline would do what my Ottie did, and that was eat up very dear tickets to the performance of I and Albert, this musical comedy about Victoria. Point 2. The other sort of people Lady Otterline, the real Lady Otterline befriended, were the Georgian poets like Walter de la Mare and the novelist D.H. Lawrence, who were all for the open life, and that they glorified the tramps who went along the road. And I think the real Lady Ottie would have approved of my Lady Ottie chewing off half the welt of my shoe, so that the boot opened and I looked like a tramp. Point 3. Lady Otterline was an aristocrat, and aristocrats don't approve of downstairs loos. The gentry always, after dinner, retired, cigarettes puffing, and activated the compost heap. Point 4. Lady Otterline was noted for her eccentric dress ideas, and I think she would have loved the idea of me wearing a duffel coat with a lace skirt. So, anonymous dog lover, I think my Ottie does resemble the original Otterline when you consider her diet for the last few days, which consisted of 4 items: dear seats, half the welt, the flush, and the duffel.
Well, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the contest of the stories, but the other team, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, win the entire contest. And that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, with questions compiled by Peter Moore. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.